You found your dream home on the North Shore. You're under contract. Everything is moving. The closing date is circled on your calendar. You've already told your friends and family when you're moving in. You might have even bought paint. And then closing date comes and nothing goes the way it's supposed to. That's what this video is all about. Not hypothetically, from a real closing that just happened. A closing where the Caroline Gow team represented the seller and watched the buyers go through an experience that nobody should have to go through. All because of one decision made early in the process. The lender they chose. If you're buying on a home on the North Shore in Northbrook, Glenview, Deerfield, Highland Park, Winnetka, anywhere in the Chicago suburbs, this video is for you. Because choosing the wrong lender doesn't just cause inconvenience, it can put you in default of your contract. And that's a situation where real legal and financial consequences happen. So let's get into it. Welcome to the channel. The Caroline Gow team is based in Northbrook, Illinois, and has been helping buyers and sellers across the North Shore for 24 years and growing. This channel exists to give you a real, honest, detailed information about what buying and selling actually looks like in this market. Not the polished version, the real version. If you're new here, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss what comes next. And if today's video helps you, share it with somebody who's getting ready to buy. It could save them from a genuinely awful experience. Now let's talk about what happened. Illinois real estate is different from other states. The process here involves attorneys on both sides, an attorney review period, a layered inspection and negotiation process, and a closing that happens at a title company, not at a bank, not at a table with your agent. There are specific contract deadlines that matter. Mortgage contingency deadline, closing dates with real consequences for missing them. When a closing falls apart in Illinois, it doesn't just mean the deal gets delayed. Depending on the terms of the contract, the buyer could be found in default. No good. That means earnest money is at risk, legal exposure, and a seller who is now back on the market, angry, inconvenienced, and potentially pursuing remedies. This is the context in which the story the team is about to walk you through happened, and every single piece of it could have been avoided. Here's what went wrong. The first problem is one that doesn't become visible until it's too late. When you work with a local trusted lender, someone the Caroline Gow team recommends, someone who has done dozens of transactions in this market, you have a dedicated contact person, one person who knows your file, one person who knows the contract terms, the closing date, the details that matter. You call them, they know who you are and where things stand. With an online lender, that's not how it works. In this transaction, there were at least 7 different people involved on the lender's side. 7 different people handling different pieces. The processor, the underwriter, someone handling conditions, someone handling the closing disclosure, someone else handling the final approval. These people were not communicating with each other in a consistent way. They were not aligned, and nobody owned the full picture of this file. When you have one person who knows your file, problems get caught early because one brain is tracking everything. When you have 7 people in silos, problems don't get caught. They get handed off, and eventually they surface, usually at the worst possible time. Which brings us to the second problem. Mistakes were made, real ones. The contract has specific terms, what gets credited to who, how certain costs are handled, what the closing statement should reflect. These aren't suggestions, they're binding. And in this transaction, the closing statement was prepared incorrectly. It didn't follow the contract. Now think about what that means in practice. You're a buyer, you're about to sign documents for the most significant financial transaction of your life. The numbers on your closing disclosure need to be right. If they're wrong, you either sign something that doesn't match what you agreed to, or the closing stops while someone tries to fix it. Neither option's good, and fixing it takes time. Time that you may not have if you're up against a contract deadline. A local lender who has closed hundreds of transactions in Illinois knows exactly what belongs on a closing statement. They've done this before. They know the contracts. They have relationships with the title company. When a detail needs to be confirmed, they make a phone call to someone they've worked with for years, and it gets handled. That doesn't happen when you're working with an online call center. The third problem is about preparation, and this one's painful to describe because it represents such a basic failure. The weekend before closing, this lender was still finalizing documents, not doing a final review, not double checking, still finalizing. The loan was not buttoned up heading into the final days. And that is a sign of a process that was behind in ways that should have been caught weeks earlier. When you work with a trusted lender, there's a cadence. There are internal deadlines before the actual closing date. The loan is in a position to close before closing day arrives because that's how it's supposed to work. You're not scrambling over the weekend. You're not sending urgent emails on a Sunday. You're ready, and you can spend that weekend thinking about your new home, not wondering if your loan is going to close. The fourth problem is what actually happened on closing day. And this is the one that makes the story real. A 10 o'clock closing, that's what we had scheduled. Both sides are ready. The seller's attorney, title company, the buyers who had taken the day off work, who were planning to get the keys, who had movers potentially lined up. 10 o'clock a.m. The closing did not finish until late in the day, not because of anything the sellers did, not because of a title issue or an attorney dispute, because the lender was still getting approvals at the closing table. Documents that should have been signed and finalized days earlier, they were still working their way through the lender's internal process in real time while everyone sat there and waited. Think about that, what that day looked like for those buyers, the stress of not knowing, sitting at a title company for hours, waiting on phone calls from people who couldn't give them a clear answer, wondering if this was going to close at all, and it almost didn't. If it had not closed that day, the buyers would have been in default of the contract, not a delay. Default. That is a word with serious consequences, legal and financial. And they came within hours of being there, through no fault of their own, because the lender they chose was not capable of executing this transaction the way it needed to be done. Let's talk about what that means for sellers, because the Caroline Gow team represents both buyers and sellers need to understand this dynamic too. As a seller, when you accept an offer, you are making a bet on that buyer's ability to close. You're taking your home off the market. You're making plans. You might be under contract on your next home. A delayed or failed closing doesn't just cost the buyer, it costs you, your time, your plans, your stress level, potentially your own purchase transaction if there's a change. This is one reason why when the Caroline Gow team reviews offers for sellers, lender reputation matters. It's not just about the rate or the pre-approval letter. It's about whether this lender has a track record of closing on time in this market. And that matters. And it's a conversation worth having before you accept an offer. Now, why do buyers choose online lenders in the first place? Because the rate looks better. Sometimes it's slightly better on paper at that moment when you're comparison shopping from your laptop. And that's understandable. When you're looking at a $500,000 or $600,000 purchase, a small difference in rate feels significant. But here's what my accountant tells me, and it's worth repeating. Cheap is expensive. That phrase sounds simple, but think about what it actually means in the context of a real estate transaction. Let's say you saved a small amount per month on your mortgage rate by going with an online lender. Now measure that against the legal fees if you've gone into default, the cost of not being able to close on time, the cost of the movers you had to reschedule, the cost of the hotel room if you had to be out of your prior home, the emotional cost of a closing day that should have been one of the best days of your life, turning into one of the most stressful, the cost to your relationship with the sellers who trusted you to close when you said you would. The math is not close. It was never close. This is the most significant investment most homeowners will ever make. The mortgage is not the place to save a few dollars by going with a provider you found online who has no history in this market and no accountability to anyone in your transaction. So what does the Caroline Gow team recommend? Work with a lender who is known in this market, known to the agents, known to the title companies, someone who has closed transactions in Northbrook, in Glenview, in Highland Park, in Deerfield, not someone who closes loans nationally in volumes and processes them like an assembly line work. A good local lender will give you one contact person from the pre-approval to the closing. That person will know your file. They will be reachable. When your agent has a question about your timeline, that lender picks up the phone. When a condition comes from underwriting, you hear about it immediately and you know what to do. There are no surprises at the closing table because this lender has been through it hundreds of times and knows exactly what needs to happen and when. There's something else worth naming here. On the North Shore, in a competitive market, your lender is part of your offer. Sellers and their agents look at the pre-approval letter. They notice who issued it. A pre-approval from a known local lender with a strong reputation actually makes your offer stronger, all else being equal, because the listing agent knows that lender. They've seen them close. They trust them on paper. That matters when a seller is choosing between multiple offers. An online lender pre-approval from someone who no one in this market has ever worked with carries less weight. And in a multiple offer situation, that difference can cost you the house. So the recommendation is simple. Before you start seriously looking at homes on the North Shore, find a local lender. Ask your buyer's agent for 2 or 3 names. Interview them. Ask how they communicate, who your contact will be, and what the process looks like from application to closing. A good lender will have a clear answer for all those things. Of course, the Caroline Gow team has a list of trusted lenders they've worked with for years, lenders who have closed in every kind of market. The competitive spring markets, the slower fall windows, and the complicated deals too. When you work with the team, they will connect you with those lenders, not because of a referral fee, because they've seen what happens when lender is the weakest link. And they've seen what a smooth transaction looks like when it isn't. Let's bring this together. 7 different people handling one file means nobody owns the details. When nobody owns the details, mistakes happen. Mistakes on the closing statement that don't match the contract. Loan documents that aren't finalized heading into the final weekend. Approvals still being processed at the closing table on the day of closing. 10 o'clock closing that doesn't finish until late in the day. Buyers sitting there for hours not knowing if they're going to get a contract deadline that, if missed, would have put those buyers in default. And a closing experience that should have been joyful that became one of the most stressful days of the transaction. All of it entirely avoidable. Cheap is expensive. Your rate matters, but it's not the only thing that matters. The lender's ability to execute, communicate, stay on schedule, and close on time matters just as much. And in the moments when things get complicated, it matters more. If you are buying a home on the North Shore and you have questions about the lending process, about what to look for in a lender, or about how to get started, reach out to the Caroline Gow team. The link is in the description below. The team has 24 years of experience in this market and has walked buyers through every kind of transaction. They will connect you with the right people from the beginning so that closing day is what it's supposed to be, the day you get your keys and start the next chapter. If this video was helpful, please share it. Share it with someone who is getting ready to buy, who might be tempted to go with the lower rate from the online lender. This is the information they need before they make that decision, not after. Subscribe if you haven't already, and hit the bell so you catch the next video. There's a lot more on the way about buying and selling what it really looks like on the North Shore. I'm Caroline Gow, Caroline Gow team with Real in Northbrook, Illinois. Bye for now.